Welcome to 30 Minute Reviews. I am Adam. Episode number 176 of the regularly scheduled show. So last week we did an editorial to start out about the Snyder Cut. I think we're going to, continue that a little bit. FandomWire.com reported that the Snyder Cut is not happening. Executives at Warner Brothers are not happy about Zack Snyder's continued promotion of the idea of the Snyder Cut, existing, and all of that. So they said it's not happening. They're not happy with Snyder. They're going to cut all ties with Snyder. They're not going to have him come back. The article also says that Zack Snyder was approached about doing the Snyder Cut for a home video release or for HBO Max. It wasn't specific. They said that he was approached about it, and that they were because he had unreasonable demands. In this case, he wanted a $20 million paycheck for the Snyder Cut, and he also wanted He also wanted to reshoot part of the movie in an effort to finish his vision, which would have been a multi-million-dollar endeavor on its own, rebuilding the sets, getting the cast back together, finishing CGI. All of that good stuff would cost a substantial amount of money. Here's the thing about that whole situation. It makes a lot of sense now. And now we see why he's been lobbying for it so much. Is that he wants his paycheck. He wants to, give it, what they think would be his final vision for the movie. Zack Snyder also has not had too much good press for one of his movies since 300, because Man of Steel was panned, or mixed. Let's not call it panned, we'll call it mixed. Batman v Superman was panned, except for by the fans. Justice League was, not well received, but that's not his fault, according to the fans. That's the fault of Joss Whedon. Sucker Punch, known flop. No one really, there's a contingency that likes Watchmen, but I don't think Watchmen was too accurate to the comic. We're going to talk about comic accuracy toward the end of this, but Watchmen wasn't exactly accurate to the tiniest degree, and there are pretty massive changes from the comic. What else was there? So, now this is something positive about him, and he's relishing in this. He's getting the positive reception he craves from the Snyder Cut, and that's why he's doing this. But they're saying it's never going to happen, and it makes sense, because it's here's the thing: if you're Warner Brothers, Justice League, and that little series of movies they did, excluding Wonder Woman, from Man of Steel on, was not well received. You kind of want to distance yourself as much as possible without being, too distant, which is why, Shazam, they have, Superman up here, but it's not, it's not Henry Cavill, it's someone in his suit. And I think for the most part, Warner Brothers like to forget about those movies, which makes sense. It makes sense to, we're doing something new. We're doing it Elseworld style, where all the movies are kind of loosely connected, but not really. Not where Elseworld is all completely unrelated. But we want to be able to do movies that aren't entirely interconnected. And more than that, we don't want to be, tied too deeply to Justice League. Now we got Ezra Miller almost out, debatably based on the video of him attacking a fan. We got what's it called? Aquaman, Jason Momoa's Aquaman, still well received. Wonder Woman 1984 is kind of completely disregarding Batman v Superman and Justice League in its entirety, because even the first Wonder Woman kind of retcons, kind of retcons Batman v Superman in that way. So I don't quite get why people think that Warner Bros. Would want to continue to be affiliated with these movies that were, for the most part, not well received. That's why, Suicide Squad, they picked pieces out that they were kind of universally liked. Cara Delevingne isn't coming back. Will Smith isn't coming back because a lot of people liked Will Smith, but there was also a contingent that didn't like Will Smith. So they're not, and it also probably cost too much money. So he didn't come back to play Deadshot. Also, his arc kind of ended in that movie. I don't think we needed another movie of continuing that, and I think that should be my unpopular opinion for the day, is that whole sequence where we didn't need we like the movie ends and it ends his character more than anyone else in a concrete place. But like even like Margot Robbie got rescued out of the dumpster fire Suicide Squad because it was very well received. Because what happened was prior to the release of Suicide Squad, everyone was lobbying for it. Just like how prior to the release of Captain Marvel, everyone was lobbying for Brie Larson to play Captain Marvel. And then after the casting happened, that's when the vitriol started. So, what was I saying? Completely lost my train of thought. Where was I? On the paper, I wrote it down. Snyder Cut doesn't happen to be a fandom wire. So another thing I wanted to address is the fact that I talked about them not wanting to work with Zack Snyder anymore. And the fact that, now I know Fandom Wire does have a spotty track record. They're kind of like, we got this cover, but without the extreme right-leaning slant. And really, this right-leaning slant tends to happen because it drives clicks, and clicks drives revenue, and it makes sense. People click on what they hate. People love to see what they hate. So Fandom Wire doesn't really have that, but it does still have a kind of a spotty track record. I think they're like 50-50 from what I've been able to gather from the internet. But based on what the article says, this all makes a lot of sense from what, how it would work. Because now we have Shazam. We have Shazam 2 coming soon. The Batman, completely disregarding everything that happened in the previous movies. We have Birds of Prey, which if you have not seen Birds of Prey, it's now available on demand. Go watch Birds of Prey. It is a phenomenal fucking movie. Some of the jokes don't land, but the same thing happens in Deadpool, but the action is so much better than Deadpool's action. So I think that this is it's a very good movie. It's definitely worth your time watching, and we'll talk about that another time. But it seems to me that they're trying to distance themselves from that. So having the director of the movie continuing to go out and say that the studio was the reason why the movie turned out like shit is not a good look for the director. And he may end up still getting work because I think his wife works for the studio or something like that. Which is how he didn't get fired in the first place from what I've read. But I don't think that it would be smart for him to continue to make these bold claims about why the movie isn't working and why it's not happening. And it makes sense as he wants that payday. He's trying to do what happened with Spider-Man, with Disney and Sony reached an agreement through online, vitriol, but the Snyder Cut people aren't quite as tame as the Save Spider-Man people were. So let's talk about this week's movie on the complete polar opposite of what we're talking about, Little Women. I saw this movie in early 2020. It was one of the last movies I saw before the theaters closed down. Maybe it was late 20. No, it was early 2020 because when I saw it, I was on disability for my car accident. It was the first movie I saw after Star Wars, where I was able to sit still long enough without being in a lot of pain. Let's talk about this movie. I see a lot of people saying that the movie's hard to follow. And I see a lot of people complaining that they don't think that the de-aging of the cast really is done properly. Let's dissect that for a second. First of all, if this movie was made by Christopher Nolan, those same people who are saying that the time skips are hard to follow, the cast, they didn't de-age the cast, they'd be coming up for thematic reasons as to why that's happening. And really, there is a thematic reason as to why that happens in this movie. Why does Florence Pugh play both the 19-year-old version of her character and the 12-year-old version of her character? Why does that happen? Because it's a flashback in the memory of The movie's told through the as flashbacks into the memory of Joe, Saoirse Ronan's character. And what that means is we're viewing the flashback the way that, we look at our own memories. And for a lot of people, when you look back in your memories, you don't necessarily see the person the way they looked when it happened. I know me personally, sometimes when you're looking at a memory, you don't see how someone looked initially, you see how they look now. So I get it. I get why that decision was made, and it's something that thematically would work because we're looking at a flashback where there's a lot going on because it's Civil War era. There's a lot going on at that time. So I get it. I get why that decision was made. I like that decision, actually, because I think that had they did like The Irishman and CGI de-aged them, it would have been jarring. And it's only a 7-year difference, and really the only character it really matters for is for Amy, because Amy's the only one who has that drastic change in growth between someone who's 12 and someone who's 19, where everyone else is already older by the time that the flashbacks begin. And the timeline's very easy to keep track of. The timeline is not hard to keep track of. You can tell by what they're talking about, and it had Christopher Nolan done this timeline skipping with the flashbacks and not clearly saying what the flashbacks are, it would have been praised to all heavens because of how innovative it is, and it's just because it's Greta Gerwig that didn't happen. But yeah, I think that was one of the big things that not hurt the movie in terms of how it came out, but hurt the movie in terms of its reception outside of that. And it's I don't want to say it's a gender thing. I don't want to go and make that assertion because it certainly looks like it. It makes sense that it is when you see what happened and you see the criticisms. It certainly you can hear it. But people who are involved are going to deny it. But I mean, the movie's beautifully shot. All the cast does a great job. I think the only person who I don't like their performance 100% is Emma Watson's performance, and her English accent or her American accent isn't great. And I think she's the only one who doesn't really get lost in the role in the same way everyone else does. And when I say that, I mean like, if you look at the cast of a movie, especially when you're using a cast with big name people, Bob Odenkirk is in the movie. You get that brief moment when you see him like, hey, that's Bob Odenkirk, and you're like, oh, that's Saul, and then it goes away because he's disappears into the role. Like Florence Pugh is a rising star, but she again falls into the role, and it doesn't you're not thinking that's I forgot her character's name in Midsommar or anything else she's in. Same thing with Saoirse Ronan. You don't think of her as whoever she played in Brooklyn or in or her character in Lady Bird, or she's the girl in the music video for Galway Girl, or Meryl Streep, another one. She's still a person, and Timothée Chalamet as well. Emma Watson, on the other hand, because of her, I don't want to say inability to act, because she can act. It's just like it doesn't differentiate itself enough. Her characters don't feel different enough from the defining role that she landed when she was a child and then grew into over the course of many years. And none of her characters really differentiate away from Hermione. And like this character is no different. So like you're watching the movie, you're picking up on the fact that her English accent's speaking out because she's British. It's a weird thing. But especially when you're up with Florence Pugh, who's also British, and I believe Saoirse Ronan does have an accent too. Everyone else can do an accent, but her, it's kind of jarring. And that I think is that's the only acting complaint I have with the movie, because besides that, the physical aspect of the performance, the movement, the the physical acting that goes along with the scene, all done very well, very well. It's just the voice is just it's a little bit jarring. But besides that, that's the only complaint I really is with the movie that I was able to make, because everything else about this movie is fantastic. This movie should have been a serious contender for Best Picture. And I know I loved Parasite. Parasite was my favorite movie of last year. This is a close second though. I think I had it on my number 2 on Letterboxd, but I'm not 100% off the top of my head from 2019. Let me just take a quick look at my list. List 2019. Yeah, it was number 2 for me. It beat out Loose, it beat out Fast Color, it beat out The Farewell. But it's such a strong movie and it's so well done. It's just, I don't understand how people didn't like this movie. So if you haven't seen Little Women, it's available on DVD now. You can check it out on DVD. You can pick it up in store. You can rent it on Amazon. You're in quarantine now, so there's no excuse not to watch it. Because, you can rent it for like $3 on Amazon. But it's definitely worth your time to check out. One other big news story this week, unrelated to Little Women. Oh, and by the way, if you're listening to this the day of it drops, this goes every week from now on, I will be giving away a digital copy of the movie on Twitter. Go to @30minreview, retweet, follow, and then you get entered to win a digital copy of the movie. Big news story this week. It has been finally confirmed who will be taking over the reins of Doctor Strange into the Multiverse of Madness from from Scott Derrickson, who has stepped down, and it is Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi will be directing Doctor Strange into the Multiverse of Madness. Now, I've seen a few things on Twitter that I want to address real quick. Number one, people complaining that they're concerned about Sam Raimi is being meddled with by Kevin Feige. Feige was a producer on all 3 Spider-Man movies done by Sam Raimi, so he knows what could happen with corporate meddling in with what Sam Raimi wants to do, because then you end up with Spider-Man 3. He also saw what Raimi can do in Spider-Man 1 and 2. I don't think you bring in a director like Sam Raimi if you're just going to rip out what he wants to do completely. I think they learn their lesson from the I'm blanking on his name right now, Edgar Wright incident with Ant-Man. Let him do what he wants. Let him have his movie. Give him broad strokes of what needs to be covered, what characters need to be included. But by and large, let him do his thing. That's what he's here for. This is not a TV show where it's like if you hear Kevin Smith talk about him going on to The Flash or him going on to Supergirl and directing an episode, it's kind of like he's It's kind of like the show will go on without the director because the cast knows what they're doing. The writers are basically running the show. It's the same, it's the same thing. The Marvel Cinematic Universe should not be operated that way because these are still movies at the end of the day. So we should have a deal for, especially a Sam Raimi one. And if we're leaning into the horror aspect, what better director is there than Sam Raimi, who's active right now? Another thing I want to point out is, Bruce Campbell always cameos in his movies. I saw someone say Mephisto. I love that. I also thought an interesting thing would be if we're doing multiverse, we can do alternate versions of characters. Maybe OG Nick Fury, the white Nick Fury. That'd be cool too. That'd be really cool. But yeah, so I think that's really all there is to say about that. There's no downside to Sam Raimi directing Multiverse of Madness. And I think that we're all going to be better off for that. Which brings us to our final thing, comic book adaptations and adherence to the source material. This is something I was thinking about where we talk about comic accuracy. And what we say by that is we see this a lot when we talk about certain characters. Like, when you talk about Spider-Man, people are upset now about how Marvel Cinematic Universe is handling Spider-Man because he's not, Uncle Ben isn't there to, to be the driving force behind him being Spider-Man. And there's this weird thing where we talk about adherence to the source material. Comic books are different inherently from other kinds of adaptations. And when I say that, what I mean is you don't need to strictly adhere to what happened in the comic in a comic book movie. There are certain things you have to kind of get right for the look and feel of the character, what the character should feel like, but you don't have to do a direct adaptation of any arc of a comic, which is why, like, when we talk about Civil War, Civil War shares a name and very broadly the concept with the Civil War comic, where the Avengers are fighting with each other over regulation, and it comes to blows. But that's largely what what we're talking about here with, when you do that, it's not a direct adaptation in the comic. Loosely, Iron Man 2 was an adaptation of Demon in the Bottle. Like, the Hulk origin is told in The Incredible Hulk, but it's not the same kind of thing as what happened in the comics. It's, very broadly the same origin, but that's what happens. Iron Man 3, loosely based on Iron Man Extremis. Captain America, the Winter Soldier. But what happened is, because we had these large concepts in play, and we have this, like, virtual pantheon of characters, where you can pull out whoever you want and use them because they're there to be used in that way, you don't have to do a direct adaptation. Meanwhile, if you were to do Harry Potter and you were to make these broad, sweeping changes, it would be weird because I'm seeing Harry Potter done as a movie. Like, for a book, when you adapt a book to be a movie, you want to keep everything kind of the same as the book. You have to trim, obviously, because a book is always going to be longer than a movie is going to be, clocking in around 2 hours. A book, depending on how long it takes for you to read it, clocks in at around 20, which a lot of that's description and a lot of that gets trimmed automatically from it. But at the end of the day, it's still not going to, fit perfectly. Whether you do have to trim stuff, especially like when you get, using Harry Potter as an example again, Order of the Phoenix, Half-Blood Prince, Deathly Hallows. Those are large books, very large books, and you have to end up cutting a lot. Entire characters get cut, character arcs get cut, and things like that. As long as the core story is intact and, what are the most important things that happen here. It's one of the key things when you talk about adaptations. You got to read the book. You got to say, what are the most important things that happen in this book? What needs to be in the movie in order to tell the story properly? Now, for a comic, it's different. Because a comic, there are so many comics. We have 850 issues of The Flash. 750 issues of The Flash. 800 issues of Batman. 1,000 issues of Detective Comics. There's so much to pull from. There are so many comics. We don't have to say, do an exact adaptation. And when you do an exact adaptation, there are certain comics that you do have to do. And I would say, like the DC Elseworlds, if you're going to use the title from one of those, you have to do a direct adaptation. If they were to straight up do The Dark Knight Returns, not that dumb shit that Zack Snyder did and called it Batman v Superman, I'm saying if they did an actual Dark Knight Returns, they have to adhere to it. They have to go all in. If they're going to do Flashpoint isn't an Elseworld, but Flashpoint has to be done as Flashpoint, as it was in the comics. I don't think you can do that as a Flash movie, and I voiced my concern about that when the Flash TV show did Flashpoint. It didn't quite feel right. It should have been the crossover event. They should have opened the season up with the crossover event and then moved from there. I think that there are some big name comics that you can use, you can change things, and you can, move from there. Like, I think if you were to do The Long Halloween, if you swapped out villains, that would be fine. Which I believe is what this new Batman movie is based on. It's based loosely on The Long Halloween. They did Old Man Logan, called it Logan, and it's one of the greatest comic book movies, if not the greatest comic book movie of all time. You don't have to keep it strictly there, but you still have to follow the same conventions of storytelling that you use when you're doing an adaptation. And I think that's where we ultimately have this issue, where it's like when we look at comic books in the same way you have to look at comic books as a piece of a whole. What was it about this comic that made it resonate? So when we're doing an adaptation, let's use again The Dark Knight Returns, which is based on, what's it called? It's based on, Batman v Superman was based on it. When you talk about it, you have to discuss why did this work? Why was it relevant? Well, it was the first time we'd seen Batman and Superman fight. And it deconstructed the characters, it deconstructed their relationship. Okay, how does that work? You need to construct them first. You can't deconstruct that which hasn't been constructed. And the example I like to use for this is when you watch Chopped or when you watch any of these Iron Chef cooking shows, and they say we did a deconstructed something or other. It's never a deconstructed food that no one's heard of. It's always like deconstructed macaroni and cheese or deconstructed turkey sub or something like that, where we're going to take something that you know, something that you love, something that everyone knows, and we're going to break it down to its parts, and we're going to reassemble the parts differently to do something interesting. And I think a great example of this in fiction is season 7 of The Office, the last season with Michael. That entire season is a deconstruction of his relationship with every character on the show. Each episode is something different. There's an episode where he deconstructs his relationship with various women that he dated. There's an episode with his relationship with Ryan and how one-sided it is that Ryan uses him and kind of just sees him as, he's kind of like a fool. That gets deconstructed in an episode. His relationship with Todd Packer, even though Todd Packer was only in like 4 or 5 episodes, that gets deconstructed. His relationship with the other people in the office and his family, how his family views him, how his relationship with Holly, that everything gets deconstructed and reassembled in a way that we can get finality for his character when he leaves the show. And I think that's probably the greatest example of a deconstruction that's been done. Why Watchmen worked is it was a deconstruction of the genre. It wasn't a deconstruction of any one character. It was, this is what superheroes are. We're going to deconstruct them, and we're going to look behind the mask, the people who run it. And we see Superman, and at the end of the day, they're children's stories, so we idealize the characters. So when we take the rose-colored glasses off, what are we really looking at here? And these people are just as bad as the rest of us. It's like The Boys is the same thing. It's like these people are just as bad as the rest of us. So, it tells a different story. And I think that that's what we need to really talk about when we talk about a comic book adaptation. Is we got to strip the story down to what are the key elements of the story, what are the key important things that need to happen here, where does this fit in with the larger narrative of the comics, why did it hit the cultural impact that it did, and it's like, why did the Winter Soldier hit the way it did? And the reason is, Bucky Barnes was considered to be a character like Uncle Ben who could not be resurrected until this comic came out. And it was something that Captain America lived with, in the same way Spider-Man lived with the death of Uncle Ben. So now we resurrect him, but he's not resurrected as a hero. He's resurrected as a Russian asset. That's so, it's such an emotional arc for Captain America then, and it really drives the story. So I think that was something else worth looking. That's why they did it that way. And it's like when you look at the movie doesn't follow the comics exactly. It's it's entirely different, but the core story is there. Captain America has found the one person who knows what it's like to be out of the time he belongs in, and he doesn't remember him. And he's trying to kill him. And that's why that one worked. Same thing with Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 and Extremis share very little in common besides the fact that Extremis is in both. And it's about Iron Man coming to terms with what it means to be a hero. And you can do a non-traditional adaptation as long as the movie's good. And as long as the source material is kind of honored. And with that, we'll wrap up for today. I think that's all we have. I do have a quick housekeeping note as usual. A few things to plug from us. Tiny.cc/swansong makes my life easier than going into, than making you have to, write down the entire Amazon URL. If you go to tiny.cc/swansong, you can pick up the, You can pick up the new, one of my more recent books, the final book in that series, The Muse, is coming out on April 28th. To pre-order that, you can go to tiny.cc/themuses. I also have another book coming out, Our Past Does Not Define Us. That comes out on the 27th. Tiny.cc/opdndu to pre-order that. Or you can check out my Twitter account at AdamTaylor792. Also, I am, right after this, shooting B-roll footage, and the audio bites for a short film that I have coming out imminently. Don't know when it's going to come out, but follow Twitter. That will be, reasonably soon. And that will be called We Live Here Now. It's a horror short. I shot it by myself. And that will be coming imminently as well. More details to follow. So until the next episode, which is next week. All right, so next week won't be a new release movie. It's actually a very old movie with a very racist scene in it. But it's still a classic. It's James Cagney's Footlight Parade. It is out on DVD and Blu-ray. So we'll be doing that next week. So we'll be doing that next week. I don't think the Blu-ray comes with a digital copy, so I'll be finding something else to give away a digital copy. I don't know why they're offering me a bundle of Footlight Parade, Rise of Skywalker, Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, considering there's nothing in common with those three movies. But definitely next week we'll be doing Footlight Parade. It's like the last scene's very racist, but it's a great movie, and it kind of epitomizes, like, it's a perfect encapsulation of that era. It's from 1933. I don't really get to talk about old movies enough, so we'll be talking about that. Maybe we'll do an entire Cagney month. We'll do more old movies. But yeah, we'll be doing Footlight Parade next week. I went to new releases on Best Buy to see what the new movies were this week, and that was on the list of, they just put out a DVD of it. So I know what we're doing next week now. Footlight Parade is next week's movie. Until then, have a great rest of your week.